Hello, guys, and welcome to the very first episode of On the Flight Line, the podcast where we will bring you in depth conversations with people from all walks of the flight line. I'm your host, Marcus Gropl, and I'm so excited to be joined today by our very own Dave Wensley. Welcome.
Thank you, Marcus. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, you are the first guest on our show.
Oh,
I'm
lucky
so
me,
I'm
lucky me.
so I'm
Yeah,
so
yeah.
excited because I don't know what to expect, but I'm excited to learn all about you. I've been reading your bio, and let's just say I didn't know you could do. You have done so much. I haven't heard, but I haven't. When I read this, I was like, he did all this.
Well, I did a lot because I'm old. You have a lot of time to do things.
So okay, so let's start with what got you started with aviation. Was it just young age, or was it?
Well, yes, I would say it's young age. Sometimes people say it's the child makes the man, and I got interested in aviation, of course, when I was very young. World War II was going on, so there was a lot of talk about military activity and airplanes and that sort of thing. I, of course, had my aircraft spotter's handbook and would scan the skies trying to see airplanes and identify them. Of course, and growing up in Miami, there weren't any German or Japanese airplanes, which are mostly what was included in the book. And then I got into model airplane building, and I built gliders and rubber band powered airplanes, and finally gasoline powered. So all of that kind of shaped my thinking for the future.
Future. Wow. And then you went to University of Miami.
I did.
And what did you use? Electrical engineering,
Right.
which is
Yes. I also, while I was a kid, I played a lot with mechanical things and electrical things. Usually, or occasionally, starting a little fire in my bedroom when I was working on some kind of chemical or electrical project. Like I built a welding machine in my bedroom, for example, and that caused a lot of problems. It wasn't too
but no
popular.
fire though. No fire.
Small,
Small,
just small.
but not
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So let's talk about your. So okay. So it says here you delayed your entering into pilot training.
Yes, as soon as I was graduated from the university with my degree in electrical engineering, I, of course, had completed ROTC in college, so I was ready
Hmm.
to go into pilot training, but there weren't any openings at the moment. The pilot training ranks were pretty full at that time. This was right after the Korean War, so there was a lot of patriotism and a lot of people had signed up. For ROTC during those years in the 50s. So I had to wait a few months. So I got a job out on the West Coast here at Douglas Aircraft in Santa Monica to spend my time before I went into the Air Force.
Wow. Okay. So then you finally got into training. When? How far
Well, it
in?
was in 1956, early in 1956. I don't remember exactly the date, but yeah, and the usual process then was you start at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, and do pre-flight training there.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I went to Moore Air Base in McAllen, Texas, to do primary flight training. That's where you learn to fly the fundamentals, the basics, and then you solo the first time. I remember that was really an exciting day after 7 or 8 hours worth of training
Training.
with an instructor. Then he gets out of the airplane, pats you on the back,
Mm-hmm.
and says, "All right, you're on your own. Take a few turns around
They just send you.
the
They send you
field.
on your way. That's
Send you
it.
on your
That's it.
way." Pretty exciting stuff. So I was in the T-34
Mm-hmm.
Mentor at the beginning, sort of like a Bonanza,
Uh-huh.
the twin V-tail Bonanza. It's like that airplane, but with a conventional tail and a two-place cockpit, tandem cockpit with the instructor in the back. And then from there, we graduated to the T-28, the North American Trojan T-28, which is
Lovely
a
airplane.
very serious
Uh huh.
airplane. the T-34 was a toy compared to
The
the
T-28.
T-28.
It's definitely a
Massive airplane, heavy, sturdy,
Mm-hmm.
pretty exciting airplane to fly. You can do all kinds of aerobatics and night flying and instrument flying and so forth. I had a tough instructor. I guess I was kind of lucky because he was really good. He was a civilian. He'd been a former crop duster, but he was really mean. He called my parents names I'd never even heard of,
Wow.
and yeah, he used to pound on the glare shield or the sun shield over the instrument panel until he would put dents in them with his fists as he screamed obscenities at me and the other students. And during the time I was under his tutelage, he washed out several students, which meant they had to leave the program.
Oh, wow.
In fact, we had 9 students go through him while I was with him, and only 2 of us graduated. Unfortunately, the other fellow, Dick Kesson, we became good friends. He later on was killed flying an F-100. So out of the 9 students that went through that instructor, I was the only one that actually completed the training and went on. And
so it was just you two that completed that
only
training?
2 of us.
Only
yeah,
2
out of 9. Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
But then he must be really.
He was tough.
Really.
He was tough.
I was like, okay, maybe there was 9. They stuck it out, but I guess he was really the one that. Were you best friends with him after, or was it just,
no,
you just,
no,
just,
I was not best friends with him at all.
But he taught you that training, right? So he got you
taught
everything.
the fundamentals. That was good. It was a good start. I'll put it that way. Well, I got lucky though. I went on to jet training in Bryan Air Force Base in Bryan, Texas, and I had another great instructor. This one he hadn't been a crop duster as far as I know, but he was in the German Luftwaffe in World War II.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my.
So at the end of the war, when the war was almost over, he surrendered on the American side. And I don't know how it worked at that time, but he found his way into the Air Force and became an instructor pilot. He had flown the the rocket-powered airplane, the Comet, the Me-163 during the war. He probably flew Me-109s or Focke-Wulf 190s too, and he may have been responsible for shooting down some of our airplanes, but he never talked about that. He only talked about his role flying the Comet Interceptor, the rocket interceptor. So he named our little flight of students Rocket Flight.
Rocket Flight.
And I made a painting to put on the wall above our training table with a rocket on it, with him astride the rocket, whipping the student in front of him with a huge whip. And so we got along quite well. I had a great time with him. He was tough. He was a very good instructor as well, so I got good training from him. I think flying the T-33 jet, of course, was a great experience. It was a startling change from flying the piston engine T-28. Anyone who's flown the T-33 or any similar single-engine jet certainly, I think, would agree that it's an amazing experience. Once you're in the airplane, you've got your helmet on, your earphones inside the helmet. You don't hear anything. It's quiet. It's smooth. There's no vibration. And once you're in the air, you can basically point the airplane anywhere you want to go, and it takes you there. It's a wonderful experience.
You're in the zone when you go into that cockpit.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful experience.
If you were to go in there, let's say we put you in a T-28 or T-33, would you be able to still know everything and still go and fly today?
Well, in my mind, I could. I don't know if my body's ready for it, but my mind could handle it. Yeah. Well, I did have the experience last year of buying a ride in the back seat of a P-51 Mustang, and I got 7/10 of an hour worth of stick time flying the Mustang. And I must say that sitting in the cockpit after 2 or 3 minutes and looking around looking at the instruments, looking at the controls, the levers, the dials, the knobs, and all that sort of thing. Why, after 2 or 3 minutes, I felt very comfortable in there.
Mm-hmm. It's like
And
you could just take over
yeah,
and go.
absolutely, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. So what did you do after your flight training? So you went.
Well, when I finished jet school, at that point, students got their choice of where to go. The students were ranked from top to bottom, and number one student got his choice of all the openings for the next opportunity, whether it was a operational squadron or for further training. And I was near the top of my class, so I could have chosen anything that was available, which included bombers and tankers and transports and day fighters and all-weather interceptors. And I chose the all-weather interceptor
Mm-hmm.
advanced course at Moody
Mm-hmm.
Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia. I don't know. At that time, you're young and fearless, and you say, well, this is the most complicated job I could go after because one crew member has to do all the work of
Mm-hmm.
flying the airplane, operating the radar, operating the fire control system, doing that at daytime, nighttime, all kinds of weather. Seems like a tough assignment, so I think I'll go after that. So I went into that school, and
Mm-hmm.
I was right. It was a difficult
Difficult.
assignment. It was tough to learn, but after a few months, you felt extremely confident in handling the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
There was no two-place trainer like the T-28 or the T-33, so the very first flight you took in that airplane, it was solo.
Mm.
And with an afterburner pushing you from the rear and swept-back wings and a high-speed takeoff and climb out, it's quite an exhilarating experience, yeah.
And then that pushed you to keep on going. Keep on.
Right, right. Oh, then I had this brilliant idea since I was born and raised in Miami,
Mm-hmm.
and I was married right after I got out of college, so neither my wife nor I had ever seen snow. So again, I had my choice of where to go next, and there was an opening with the 324th Fighter Interceptor Squadron up in Westover, Massachusetts, which is near Springfield. Westover Air Force Base, I should say, which is near Springfield, Mass. So I decided that would be a great experience. We'd go up there and find out what snow is like, and boy, oh boy, that was kind of a mistake.
And then you came over here, right, for the beautiful Southern California weather.
After I got my fill of the snow, exactly right.
I know, because that's a big change, right, from Miami to Massachusetts, right?
Oh,
It's just
let me tell you, a big change. Listen, we're driving up to Massachusetts, and we're going through Maryland,
mm-hmm.
and we got out of the car to have lunch, and there was ice everywhere, and of course, I kind of ignored that, and within a couple of seconds, I was on my butt, and I'd sprained my right arm, and it started turning purple. So I had to put on a makeshift sling. My wife had to take over driving.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got to the squadron to report to the commanding officer, I went in to meet him and report for duty, and I couldn't raise my arm to salute. And I can just imagine what was going through his mind.
Yeah.
He must have said, they expect me to use this guy as a pilot and he can't even walk, you know. But I got over that in a few days. And, but I'll tell you, my first experience was rather unnerving. Within a few days, I was ready to fly.
Mm-hmm.
And so the squadron commander told me to take an airplane, take an F-86D,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we were trained to fly in, the first single-seat all-weather interceptor the Air Force had. And he said, go take an aircraft and fly around the area and get acquainted. See what the airfield looks like from the air, look for the landmarks, look for the auxiliary fields around, and just in general get familiar with everything. Find out where the mountaintops are, where the towers are, so you'll know the area when you come in. So I started doing that, and the weather was deteriorating when I took off. There was lots of snow on the ground, but so far it hadn't snowed actively since we'd been there. But there was plenty of snow on the ground. Anyway, as I flew around the area, it kept getting darker and darker, sky turning gray, and I could see this gray sort of a wall moving toward the field. So I called for permission to come in and make a landing, and the permission was denied because 4 of the squadron fighters were taking off in sequence, and so I had to wait for them. Meanwhile, the grayness around me got thicker and thicker till all I could see was the field directly below me. So finally, after the 4 fighters took off and disappeared into that gloom, I came down and made a landing. And as I rolled down the runway and opened the canopy, I realized it was snowing heavily. And it was very exciting. I could hardly wait to get out and feel these big white blobs, you know.
Yeah. Snow angel, and,
all that, right?
Snowball.
But it didn't have it had a sort of a unhappy, happy ending. What happened next was they recalled the 4 fighters, and they started coming in and landing one at a time. And meanwhile, in the flight shack, we could hear the radio calls over the loudspeaker. And the 4th airplane, a fellow named Stewart, I think it was Sam Stewart, a lieutenant, he couldn't find the field, even though he was under radar control. The ceiling had dropped down below 200 feet. So we went outside in the snow, and by this time it was a full-on blizzard. And just standing near the parking ramp, we couldn't see the runway.
Wow.
And we could hear Stewart going by and making a go around, and he did that 2 or 3 or 4 times, I don't remember exactly. And then the sound quit. So we knew that he'd run out of fuel, and we didn't know what happened to him. So we all went in, and everybody was pretty gloomy, and we sat in the flight shack waiting for some word. And I don't know, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes later, Lieutenant Stewart walked in the door. He had ejected over the field, and the airplane went on and crashed in the Springfield City dump.
And in a dump. So at least they disposed it properly, right?
Yeah, right. I don't know if that was his plan, but it worked out that way.
It worked out that way.
Yeah. That was my first day on the job, and I thought, oh my, what have I got myself into here?
It was exciting though, and then at least you got to do more, right? Because you went to Morocco after Massachusetts.
Well, yeah, I was there in Massachusetts for quite a while. There were a lot of more incidents there. The job was air defense, and to be quite blunt, we were trained to shoot down Russian bombers. And this was sort of one of the most intense phases of the Cold War in the late 1950s. Everyone was pretty paranoid about the possibility of Russian bombers streaming over from the North Pole and coming down through Canada and attacking the United States. And at that time, we didn't have the early warning radar set up, so it was relatively short-range radar, so there wasn't a lot of time to get fighters airborne. We had missiles in a lot of the cities at that time to intercept enemy bombers should they arrive over our territory. But, by the time a Nike Ajax or Hercules lights off on the ground to shoot down a bomber, it's already overhead. So that's a little late. So the role of the fighters in the Air Defense Squadron was to get out in front of the targets and shoot down the bombers. So we'd be on alert 24 hours a day. The typical assignment for a squadron fighter pilot was to be on alert for 24 hours and get 24 hours off to rest, and then practice day missions the next day, and then the next day you do night missions, and then start the cycle all over again. And when we weren't scheduled to be on alert, you'd play the role of simulated bomber coming in from Canada to be intercepted by other fighters from your squadron. And what that meant was, as a simulated bomber, you'd come in on a straight line say, heading for a city like Springfield or Worcester or Boston or New Haven or something like that. And then the fighters would be scrambled and directed up to make an intercept by ground radar. And once you got within about 30 miles of the target, a fighter pilot could then locate the target with his onboard radar and then lock onto that target, and then the fire control system would guide him into making the intercept. We didn't carry the rockets, which were our weapon system during most of these missions, but each intercept was recorded on tape, and then we'd review the tapes back on the ground after the mission. So that was the routine day in and day out for weeks on end. And during that process, there was one particularly notable event. I was scheduled to be a target in a T-33 on a particular exercise we were having that involved all of the fighter squadrons in the northeast Boston air defense sector. And my job was going to be to fly up to the Canadian border and then turn around and come back and head for Boston in a flight of 3 ships, 3 T-33s, acting as a small squadron of Russian bombers. As I taxied out to take off, and it was snowing heavily that morning, my transmitter quit on my radio, and so I had to turn around and go back. There wasn't enough time to get into another T-bird to go meet my rendezvous point, so they scrambled a T-33 from Stewart Air Force Base in New York. What happened next was rather unnerving. I went back to the flight shack to await another assignment. A little later, we heard the news that there had been a mid-air collision. It turns out that the position that I was to take in that flight of 3, that particular T-bird had been hit by an F-94 starfighter and knocked out of the sky, and 2 pilots were killed. So I don't know, call it luck or whatever, although I've often thought if I'd have been in that T-bird, he would not have hit me. I'd have gotten out of the way. It was unfortunate the other guys did not. So yes, and after that assignment, and this was a rather interesting event also. While we were at Westover, one day we were surprised to learn that there was a brand new F-104 arriving on the base. Well, we had a sister squadron, the 337th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, headed up by Colonel James Jabara, who was a famous Korean ace, multiple ace, I should say. And he was bringing in the first F-104 starfighter that the 337th was going to receive. So we figured the 324th, being the sister squadron, we'd be getting our 104s next.
Yes.
Well, instead we got orders to ship out to Morocco, to a place called Sidi Slimane, wherever the hell that was. We had no idea. Some of the pilots didn't even know where Morocco was, much less Sidi Slimane. So yes, after a short period of time, a few weeks later, we found ourselves arriving on this remote site down in the middle of Morocco, where we were going to continue our intercept mission using F-86Ds that had been shipped over, actually on a ship from New Orleans. They had to be assembled in Brindisi, Italy, and then flown down to Sidi Slimane. But over the next few weeks, we were outfitted with our new airplanes.
Wow. That's just the way that the movement that you had to, you went from the cold area, then you go to Morocco. Was it cold in Morocco, or was it just?
It was bloody hot, I can tell you that. It was miserable. We lived in plywood huts, the squadron pilots
Oh my
and the
gosh.
crewmen and
Uh-huh.
the and enlisted personnel and other officers, non-flying officers.
Mhm.
Most of us lived in these leftover wooden huts from World War II.
Mm.
Although the married officers were able to get on-site housing
Mhm.
in the at the air base. But I had made the decision to leave my wife and newborn child back in the States,
Mhm.
and so they went back to Miami and lived with her parents until I completed my tour.
Mhm.
I wasn't sure I wanted to stay in the Air Force at that time.
Uh-huh.
I still had the possibility of an engineering career,
Mhm.
and I'd had a sample of what it was like to work for Douglas Aircraft, and I was in their missile division. That was
Mhm.
pretty exciting,
Mhm.
new development work. So I was kind of torn between continuing with an Air Force career or going back to engineering.
Uh-huh.
But my tour in Morocco kind of decided that for me. Yeah, it was not all that enjoyable. The
Mhm.
flying was good,
Mhm.
but the maintenance on the aircraft was poor. We had
Mhm.
problems getting parts for airplanes.
Mhm.
A lot of times, most of our airplanes were grounded for
Mhm.
lack of parts.
Uh-huh.
We had lots of failures of equipment
Mhm.
in flight. For example, during the time I was there, two pilots had to abandon their aircraft and eject because of engine failures and fires on board. I know of four, let me think, three, no, four uh, dead stick landings that
Mhm.
pilots had to make
Oh my
because their
gosh.
engines quit and they couldn't get them
Couldn't. Uh-huh.
restarted. Personally, I never had any serious event happen. I lost a lot of, or I should say, I've had a lot of equipment failures like
Mhm.
the fuel control system failing, the hydraulic system failing, instruments failing, that sort of thing. But each time was able to make it back safely to the base,
Uh-huh.
so I didn't have any serious problems. There was one event. Occasionally, we got the pleasure of taking an airplane back to Italy for what's called Iran, which is inspection and repair as necessary.
Mhm.
And it was really necessary on these airplanes, I can tell you that. And anyway, I was flying wing on a more senior lieutenant,
Mhm.
and we were taking two F-86s back to Torino.
Mhm.
And I had a lot of problems with my airplane. One of the main fuel tanks didn't feed,
Uh-huh.
so I was running low on fuel. I'd lost my artificial horizon, so
Oh.
I had to depend on him to
Mhm.
fly his wing and not get isolated where I'd have to fly on my own.
Mhm.
And we made it down to Torino and found out on final approach that it was snowing again.
Oh
This was
gosh.
Springfield, Massachusetts, all over
Uh-huh.
again.
It's all over.
But we had been advised that they were going to have high scattered clouds and 7 miles visibility.
Oh my
Well,
gosh.
no, it wasn't true. That
No.
turned out to be heavy overcast and about 300 feet ceiling and
Completely wrong. Completely wrong. They gave you the wrong
completely wrong.
information.
Yeah, don't trust the weatherman. So
I don't think we
I
trust him
landed
now.
on his wing. I landed on Lieutenant Edwards' wing,
Mhm.
and we made it down. I turned off the runway and pulled into a parking slot, and my engine quit. I was out of fuel.
Right when you pulled in, it just
Just
gave
quit.
out. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So
You perfect timing
yeah,
though, right?
perfect timing.
No go
Right.
arounds
Right.
necessary. Oh my gosh. Any more fun stories about your
Well, just to mention that the job at City Slimane was to protect the bombers we had there. Our frontline bomber in the 1950s and beyond, 1960s, and so was the B-47, an amazing, beautiful six-engine jet airplane. Very difficult to fly. There were a lot of problems with that airplane. I think something a little over 2,000 were actually built,
wow. Mhm.
and they were stationed all around the world. with targets in Russia and Russian-controlled satellite nations. Fortunately, they never had to make those raids on Russia. The Cold War ended without us having to drop any bombs or having to intercept any Russian airplanes and shoot them down as they were attacking the U.S. So that's the good news. But during the time period that the B-47s were in use, I think over 200 were lost in either training or practice missions, along with their crew members. So it was the Cold War period was not cold for everyone. There were lots of people lost just trying to hold the line and make sure that we provided adequate deterrence against the possibility of Russian attacks. I did have an opportunity to fly in one of those B-47s. There was a reason to go back to Homestead Air Force Base, which is where the squadrons came from that flew over to City Slimane on temporary duty. So I got an opportunity to hop a ride in one. So I sat on the floor below the pilot's feet and flew something like, I forget, 12 or 14-hour mission. It didn't take that long to get from Morocco to Florida, but we didn't go straight there. Instead, they flew over the Midwest and did simulated bomb runs over several cities before turning back southeast and going into Homestead near Miami. So I got to see my wife and newborn son, who of course did not recognize me, for a happy weekend, and then returned back to Morocco to continue my tour. We had lots of opportunities to intercept unknown aircraft flying out of city, because there were British and French military as well as civilian aircraft in the area, and the coordination between flying units, civilian and military, I'll say it was just less than complete. So quite often we'd have to intercept an unknown airplane and go up and identify it by its markings and radio the information back. They all turned out to be friendlies, fortunately.
I'm going to pause for 1 second. So where were we? Okay, we're back on. We got everything working again.
Right. Well, so it was, Marcus, it was about time for me to make a decision whether to continue as an Air Force pilot or return to civilian life. And I chose to take my opportunity to leave the service. I think it was the right decision for me. There was a rather interesting incident the last month I was over there. The squadron commander was not happy with me for deciding to not re-up for another 2 years. So he got the word out I wasn't to be allowed to fly again and collect my flight pay for the last month. That was $150 added to my meager salary, so that was really important. I wanted that money. So I hung around the flight shack every day looking for an opportunity, and one day the squadron adjutant came out into the flight shack area and said, I need a pilot to take a package over to division headquarters in Rabat. I leaped up and said, I'll do it, grabbed the package and ran out and jumped in an airplane and took off. Well, I needed to log 2 hours over and 2 hours back, which is about the maximum possible duration you could squeeze out of an F-86D. Well, I managed to do that, got over there and delivered the envelope, got refueled, got back in the plane, took off. Then I called the tower and asked for permission to make a high-speed pass. They said, permission denied. I interpreted that to mean permission approved. And so I circled around, put it back in afterburner, went screaming down the runway about 3 feet off the deck, and then pulled up into a vertical climb, did a series of rolls, and then headed back towards City Slimane, logged my 2 hours, and collected my $150. So that was the end of my
Did you hear
my
anything from the
career.
tower, or did you
Never
just
heard a
never heard?
word.
You just
Never
just
heard
ran
a
with it.
word. Never heard a word. I just cashed the check.
So now you've after that you left the service, right? You left.
Yes. Well, I stayed in the reserves until 1970, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But I got involved in highly classified defense work,
Mm-hmm.
working on a missile program and a few other things, and so I was not recalled for duty in Vietnam.
Okay.
So for me, it worked out very well. I continued the missile work and defense work of various types, and then got into manned space activity.
Oh, manned space.
Worked on several projects, including the European Space Lab, some payloads that flew in the shuttle.
Wow.
I was on the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, which was an Air Force project to take a couple of astronauts up into space. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was to be a manned spy satellite.
Oh, okay.
It was being advertised as a scientific research satellite, but in reality,
It was doing
the
something
payload was a gigantic camera. So I got familiar with several of the astronauts at the time, got to know them. I had responsibility for the flight control system. So I went from operating a flight control system to designing a flight control system.
Wow.
This time for a spacecraft instead of for an airplane.
Wow.
So that was very rewarding. Later on, I was involved in the International Space Station. I achieved rank of vice president at the company, which was by then McDonnell Douglas. I ended my career with responsibility for development of a reusable launch vehicle that we were working on at that time. And then after retiring in 1996, I continued my career as a consultant on my own little business, operating, doing consulting work in Europe and in Russia and in England. So I had a good career, got to do a lot of traveling, met a lot of fantastic people, participated in a lot of very interesting projects. So all in all, I think it was the right decision for me.
Wow, it's just you have such a long, probably have a long resume by now. You got like what, 3, 4 pages worth of resume?
Well, if it's large type, yes.
But you worked on basically the manned space program, basically from its start, kind of, because with Skylab that was the start, right? Of
yes, we did Skylab at the division I was in. I was only sort of peripherally involved in that because I was working in parallel on another advanced design project. I spent most of my early career in what we called advanced design, which was coming up with new concepts for new vehicles, both manned and unmanned, and then taking them through the conceptual phase, writing proposals to the various agencies, mostly NASA, the Air Force, of course. And then if they were successful in being promoted, then they would go on and go into development. But I stayed in advanced design and development for quite a while. And so it was only, also I bypassed Apollo because Rockwell won the competition for the command module, which was the exciting part.
Yeah.
I worked on the design of that, again on the flight control system for the McDonnell Douglas version of the command module for Apollo. And we lost that competition, and it went to other contractors. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you almost got a chance to work on Apollo.
Almost. Right.
So now, what do you do in your free time now, in the present today?
Well, I work at Lyon Air Museum.
Yes, you work with
as a docent. I enjoy taking people around and showing them our exhibits and aircraft and talking about World War II history.
You love hanging out with us?
I love it. It's a great team of people. I look forward to being here. I'm usually here on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and anytime else that I'm needed.
Anytime else. I do have one thing because we're running out of time, and I know you got places to be. You're always called for stuff. Would you, let's say, okay, so now we know that SpaceX is going to try and send people up into space commercially. Would you do that?
Heck no, that's crazy.
You've worked so detailed with all this flight control with Donald Douglas. You wouldn't go? You wouldn't want to go?
No, I would not want to go. That's for people with more guts than I have, or not as smart as I am.
It looks
I don't
fun
know
though, right? Live on Mars, maybe?
No, it's not going to be fun. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be emotionally taxing, physically taxing. The intensity of the training and the issues that the crew are going to encounter are going to be challenging. Hopefully, they'll be up for it as they have been. As you well know, Marcus, throughout the Apollo program, there were some very touchy situations.
Yes.
Very difficult situations. There were also some lives lost during the development program. And fortunately, the missions that were conducted, everyone got home safely. We lost lives during the flights, 2 flights of the launch vehicle, the shuttle orbiter. So it's a dangerous business. It requires very unique capabilities among the personnel. And fortunately, there is a wide variety of people available to take those risks who can meet both the mental and the physical challenges that they offer. But I don't think I'm one of them.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Dave, for being the first guest on our show. Hopefully, we'll see you back again. We'll talk more, maybe.
Great to talk with you, Marcus.
Great to talk with you. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for joining us on this first episode of On the Flight Line. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube at Lyon Air Museum. This has been Marcus Gropl with On the Flight Line. Till we meet again, and blue skies to you.